So there's a sort of opportunistic quality to some of these protests that I think are important to understand.
Check the numbers, and the latest number I could find is maybe as many as 200,000 Chinese students in the United States.
It's enormous.
Now, explain, they have censors on the internet in China, but they allow 200,000 students. I think it's the largest number ever of any foreign country in this country going to school. And they can obviously have access to everything here. Why do they do that?
There's a recognition on the Chinese government's part that they cannot afford to cut themselves off from the technical dividend that comes from sending your young people abroad. They were, going back to the very early days of the economic reforms, the young people that went overseas and got economics training, for instance, were essential to them being able to develop the kind of financial markets and financial institutions that were vital to be able to succeed as an economy. But when they go abroad, there is the risk. Deng Xiaoping used to say that when you open the window, mosquitoes can fly in, and he was willing to accept that idea that when you send these young people abroad, they may pick up some unsavory ideas like appeal for democracy and things like that. The reality has turned out to be pretty complicated. I mean, oftentimes, and I've gotten to know a number of young Chinese students who go overseas, and oftentimes when they're overseas, they become even more patriotic about China. They become more defensive, and that's partly, it's logical, right? You can sort of imagine why you're feeling a little bit out of sorts. You hear people criticizing China, and you say, well, it's my responsibility to stand up for it. So that's part of it.
Here, let's run up. This is we found this. Don't even know who it is, but they're Chinese students talking about the United States and democracy, and see what you think of this.
I think the problem is it might not suit China. So if it is such a good thing, maybe China would evolve, would have an evolution towards democracy on its own.
I think the most witty and tricky thing about American government or society is that they put personal liberty as the mainstream.
It's cute because the Americans tend to picture an American soldier on the street of Iraq and saving Iraq people from hell, and I think whenever there is a dictatorship, as someone would call it, the U.S. tend to think that it's their job to save those people, and they haven't realized that democracy is an absolute value in U.S., but it might be not that absolute in other countries.
How much do the young people there want democracy, and do they know what it is?
The word itself is toxic in a way, and that's because it's been for so many years identified as a threat to the gains that Chinese people have made over the course of the last generation. And so if you ask somebody outright, what do you think of democracy? You're going to get very few people who say to you, I think that's a terrific idea for China. But what you do find is that when you dig beneath that the ideas that we consider to be essential to an open society are actually now very much in demand in China. For instance, rule of law, the ability to go in and to pursue an issue in court. This is the kind of thing that didn't matter 40 years ago when nobody had any property. But all of a sudden now people have accumulated a nest egg. They bought a house, they bought a car. And if somebody is able to abuse their own power in order to take that away from you, that has inspired in people a sudden and urgent respect for the institutions that can help you. So that's one of the things you hear is that we want rule of law. And it's in some ways it's been decoupled from the specific democratic objective that we think of as so intrinsic to our culture. But the other thing that they think of also, and this word has a lot more resonance in China, is justice. If you ask people in China, do you think that your system as it's currently constituted delivers justice? If you'd asked those young people in that video, I think you would have had a lot more, there would be a long pause. Because what they know, of course, is that there is not justice right now for vast numbers of people. This is why we see unrest on the Chinese streets. I mean, the numbers are quite remarkable. I mean, the Chinese today contend with about 180,000 acts of civil unrest every year. That's about 500 a day somewhere in the country. And people aren't doing that because it's a convenient solution. In fact, it's a very dangerous thing to do, to take to the streets. They're doing it because they have deep grievances about how it is that the system is going to protect what they've acquired. Chinese people have worked unbelievably hard for the last 40 years, not to mention all the years before that. But as they look around and they try to figure out, well, what do we need in this society to protect ourselves? The first answer is not democracy, but often one of the first answers is a court system. We need an accountability system in some way to maintain some kind of supervision on the leadership so that people, particularly sort of low and medium and mid-level party officials, are not able to take advantage of their position.